Modern humans walk the planet as a family of billions. Yet genetically, we are eerily uniform, far more alike than other apes. In 1972, scientists dared to ask why, suspecting a disaster had once reduced our ancestors to near extinction. Decades later, familiar catastrophes like the Toba supervolcano seemed to provide an answer. But new evidence has demolished that theory. Instead, a deeper, stranger crisis emerges. Could nearly every human ancestor have vanished 900,000 years ago, leaving just 280 survivors to rebuild our species? To find out where all the others went, we begin with the riddle written in our DNA. In the early 1970s, a quiet revolution began in the world of genetics. Scientists studying human DNA stumbled on a puzzle that did not make sense. When they compared our genes to those of chimpanzees and gorillas, they found something startling. Modern humans carried far less genetic variation than any of our closest relatives. For a species that had spread across continents and adapted to every climate, this salmon seemed impossible to explain. The question haunted researchers. What could have squeezed all of humanity through such a narrow genetic gate? The search for answers took a dramatic turn in 1972. A landmark study published that year measured the genetic differences between people from around the globe. The data painted a stark picture. At some point in the distant past, human populations must have shrunk to a fraction of their former size. The study's authors called it a genetic bottleneck. For the first time, the idea took hold that every person alive today might be descended from a surprisingly small group of survivors. What could have caused such a collapse? The evidence was thin, the tools were primitive by modern standards. Early calculations placed this mysterious event somewhere between 35,000 and 65,000 years ago. But the numbers were little more than educated guesses. The real date and the true cause remained hidden in the fog of prehistory. The only certainty was the scale of the disaster. Compared to chimpanzees, who displayed nearly twice as much genetic diversity, humans seemed to carry the genetic scars of a catastrophe so severe that it shaped the very foundation of our species. For decades, the mystery went unsolved. The world's leading scientists debated whether a single catastrophe could explain such a dramatic reduction in diversity. Some wondered if it was a series of smaller events, or if the answer lay somewhere else entirely. With no fossils, no written records, and only the faintest traces in our DNA, the field stood at a dead end, waiting for a breakthrough that would finally reveal what happened to our ancestors so long ago. Few scientific theories have captured the imagination quite like the Toba catastrophe hypothesis. In the 1990s, the story seemed to fit perfectly. A volcanic supereruption at Lake Toba in Sumatra, Indonesia, unleashing a force 10,000 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens in 1980. The eruption dated to about 74,000 years ago. Scattered ash across continents and, according to early models, triggered a volcanic winter that might have lasted for years. The idea was simple and dramatic, an event so devastating that it reduced the human population to a few thousand survivors and offered an explanation for our genetic uniformity. For decades, this explanation dominated textbooks and documentaries. Researchers pointed to layers of ash, abrupt climate shifts, and the sheer scale of the eruption. But as the evidence grew, cracks began to appear in the theory's foundation. Archaeologists working in India and Sumatra uncovered stone tools and signs of continuous human activity through the Toba ash layers. Sites within reach of the eruption's fallout showed no signs of sudden abandonment or population collapse. Human presence persisted tool by tool, layer by layer, a pattern that argued for continuity rather than collapse. One archaeologist, sifting through these ancient places, noticed something striking. The same types of stone tools appeared both before and after the ash settled. If the eruption had wiped out nearly all humans, there should have been a break, some clear sign of disruption in the archaeological record. Instead, the continuity was unmistakable. Climate scientists also joined the debate. Advanced models, far more sophisticated than those available in the 1990s, suggested that Toba's global cooling effect was likely far less severe than once thought. While the eruption certainly disrupted local ecosystems, there was little evidence for a worldwide catastrophe. The volcanic winter, once imagined as a planet-wide killer, faded into a regional event with limited long-term impact. Geneticists, too, began to question the timeline. The genetic bottleneck signal in human DNA did not match the date of the Toba eruption. The numbers simply did not add up. By the 2010s, the scientific consensus had shifted. The Toba hypothesis, once the leading explanation for humanity's genetic bottleneck, could no longer withstand the weight of new evidence. The search for answers returned to square one. And the mystery of our origins grew deeper than ever. Wang Zhu and his team at the Chinese Academy of Sciences approached a long-standing genetic mystery from a new angle. Instead of searching in ancient bones or volcanic ash, they turned to the DNA of living people Drawing on a global sample of 3,154 modern human genomes, the researchers set out to reconstruct the population history of our species using the present to peer into the past. Their tool was a computational method called FIT-COAL, which stands for Fast Infinite Decimal Time Coalescent Process. This approach analyzes tiny differences scattered across thousands of genomes, searching for patterns that only make sense if populations once crashed or rebounded. By comparing the frequency of genetic variants, how often a particular DNA letter appears in different people, FIT-COAL can map the rise and fall of population sizes over hundreds of thousands of years. Unlike earlier methods that struggle to see through the haze of deep time, FIT-COAL slices genetic data into extremely fine time intervals. This allows it to pick up sudden changes in population size that older techniques would have smoothed over or missed entirely. The model works by assuming each new genetic variant traces back to a common ancestor, then calculating how quickly those lineages must have merged as the ancestral population shrank or grew. The team's dataset was vast and diverse, drawing from people across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. By focusing on neutral parts of the genome, regions not shaped by natural selection, they aimed to capture the true signal of demographic change, rather than the noise of adaptation or migration. The analysis required careful accounting for mutation rates, generation times, and the possibility of hidden population structure. But the method's power came from its ability to test these assumptions across thousands of genomes simultaneously. Running the FIT-COAL model on this unprecedented dataset, Hughes' group detected a dramatic collapse in the effective population size of our ancestors, not tens of thousands, but hundreds of thousands of years ago. The signal was sharp, unmistakable, and appeared across multiple populations. This breakthrough did not depend on a single fossil or archaeological site. It depended on the collective memory written into the DNA of people living today. The numbers behind this ancient catastrophe defy comprehension. At the lowest point, the breeding population of our ancestors dwindled to just 1,280 individuals, not a tribe, not a village, barely enough to fill a modern high school auditorium. This was not a temporary dip or a regional setback. Genetic analysis shows that 7% of all human ancestors alive at the time vanished from the story of life. The survivors represented less than 2% of the original population. If a similar collapse happened today, nearly 8 billion people would disappear, leaving only a handful to carry our species forward. This was not a brief episode. The bottleneck endured for an estimated 117,000 years, longer than the entire span of recorded human history. For more than 100 millennia, humanity teetered on the edge of oblivion, with every birth and death carrying the weight of our future. The genetic consequences were just as severe. Researchers estimate that 85% of our original genetic diversity was lost forever during this crisis. Traits, lineages, and potential paths for evolution vanished with each generation. Such a small population would have faced constant threats, disease, starvation. Even a single bad season could have ended the line. The survivors would have lived in scattered, isolated groups, each birth a fragile hope against overwhelming odds. The genetic evidence does not simply suggest a reduction. It points to a bottleneck so extreme that it left a permanent mark on our DNA, one that every person alive today still carries. This is the scale of loss that modern science has uncovered. A near erasure of humanity stretching across continents and centuries, with only a tiny thread of survivors holding the story together. The magnitude of what was lost and what was barely saved reshapes our understanding of where we come from, how close we came to disappearing entirely. Bones tell a story that DNA alone cannot. Paleoanthropologist Giorgio Manzi has spent decades studying the fossil record, searching for traces of our ancient ancestors. He noticed something odd. Between about 950,000 and 650,000 years ago, the Earth holds its breath. Fossil sites that once yielded a steady trickle of hominin bones fall almost silent. Only a handful of fragmentary area remains have ever been found from this interval, and even these are fiercely debated. Some, like the Spanish Homo antecessor, do not match the anatomy expected of the survivors. Their skulls are too delicate, their features too distinct. Then, in the red sands of Thomas Quarry near Casablanca, a partial skull surfaced, dated to 773,000 years ago. It sits right at the edge of the fossil gap. The skull's thick vault and robust brow hint at a lineage unlike those that came before. It shares traits with what later scientists would call Homo H. heidelbergus, a species now recognized as the last common ancestor of Neanderthals, Denisovans, and modern Homo sapiens. The timing is no coincidence. This fossil appears just as the genetic evidence suggests our population began to recover, offering a rare glimpse of the survivors who pulled through the crucible. Population bottlenecks are known to speed up evolution in other mammals. When diversity drops, chance events can fix new traits more quickly, sometimes leading to rapid divergence. For our ancestors, This may have been the moment when isolation and hardship forced to leap forward. The features seen in the Thomas Quarry skull echo through the bones of later hominins across Africa and Eurasia. The fossil gap, once a mystery, now looks like the shadow cast by a near-extinction event. From this narrow passage, a new lineage took root, one that would eventually branch into all the humans alive today. The evidence is thin, but the alignment between genetics and bones is striking. For researchers like Manzi, the fossil record is not just a list of missing names. It is a reminder of how close we came to vanishing and how a single skull, weathered by nearly 800,000 years of time, can carry the weight of our shared survival. Around 900,000 years ago, the planet's climate system turned unpredictable and harsh. Glacial cycles, once lasting 41,000 years, began to stretch out to 100,000 years, building thicker ice sheets and drawing more water and carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Atmospheric carbon dioxide fell to some of its lowest levels in millions of years, stripping the land of moisture and pushing ecosystems to their limits. During marine isotope stage 22, conditions reached a breaking point across Africa and Eurasia. Lush grasslands gave way to barren soil and dust. Evidence from isotopic analysis of large herbivore teeth tells the story. Animals that once grazed on abundant grasses had to adapt to sparse, woody plants or die. The chemical signatures in their enamel record, a sudden collapse in vegetation. For the humans who depended on these animals for food, the loss was catastrophic. A paleoclimate researcher, reviewing these isotopic records, describes a world where survival was no longer a given, but a daily struggle against a planet growing colder, drier, and less forgiving. For thousands of generations, early humans lacked the most basic defenses against their changing world. Without fire, there was no reliable warmth on freezing nights, no cooked food to unlock extra calories, and no easy way to keep predators at bay. The archaeological record from this period is almost silent when it comes to tools or shelters that could have softened the blow of a bitter climate. Survival depended on little more than luck and whatever resources the land could offer. But around 790,000 years ago, something changed. At a site called Geisher Benot Yaakov in what is now Israel, researchers uncovered clear traces of ancient hearths, evidence that hominins had learned to control fire. Charred seeds, burned flint, and layers of ash point to repeated use, not just accidental blazes. This breakthrough was more than a convenience. It was a turning point. With fire, these early humans could cook tougher foods, expand their diets, and stay warm through harsh winters. The mastery of fire tipped the balance, transforming vulnerability into resilience and setting the stage for a dramatic population rebound. Dissent soon followed the headlines. In 2025, a team led by John Terhorst published a pointed critique questioning whether the dramatic population crash detected by Fitco was real or mirage. Their analysis used the same genetic data but applied alternative methods. Mushi, MSMC2, and Relate. None of these tools found evidence for a bottleneck as sharp or as ancient as Fit suggested. Durhor argued that the Fit-Cole algorithm might mistake complex population structure or ancient migrations for sudden collapse, especially when analyzing genomes from groups that had long histories of separation and mixing. Other researchers like Dervisula and colleagues proposed that modern humans could descend from two or more ancestral groups that later merged rather than a single tiny population. Yet, as the debate sharpened, new lines of evidence kept surfacing. A 2024 study led by Domenko pointed to mass migrations and widespread megaponic extinctions around 900,000 years ago, signals that something extraordinary did reshape the world. The question remains unsettled, but the weight of climate extinction and genetic clues keeps the mystery alive. Every living human may carry the genetic legacy of just 1 to 280 survivors. As climate change again tests our resilience, the lesson is clear. Survival hinges on adaptation, not inevitability. Our shared origins are a reminder. Existence is fragile and progress is never guaranteed. The next chapter of our story depends on what we do now. What will our ancestors say about us?